Hello, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and we are happy to have you with us, no matter how you may be getting to us, for it is a very loaded show for us. It's Jake Fromm stopping by. With Jake on the show today, we're going to talk a little bit about what comes next for the Georgia quarterback situation, because I do believe this is that time in which a lot of the groundwork is laid to eventually win the job. Now, a lot of this was going to take place actually during practice, spring practice, things like that. But there is so much about a quarterback that is kind of a ceremonial position, right? And so it's this time of year when you kind of take the reins of that leadership. And so we're going to talk to Jake about how that's done, because if you want to go back to Jake's time at Georgia, he did a pretty good job of that. He made a name for himself very, very quickly. We may even reminisce with him a little bit about, just how confident he was able to be stepping on to a college environment for the first time. We'll talk to Jake more about that here coming up. I'm actually really looking forward to that conversation. Speaking of quarterbacks, Stetson Bennett was honored with an award yesterday and had some interesting things to say in the aftermath of getting that award. We're going to talk about that on the show. And I'm going to do this. There's a Georgia player that's kind of getting some buzz right now. We'll have some fun with that. But I want to use this as a setup to say that even though that Georgia is now back-to-back national champions, there is one aspect of the conversation around Georgia that hasn't changed at all. Still the same thing this time of year that it always is. And this is a bell that we've rung plenty of times in the past. We're going to do it here again today. So if you don't mind, that's where we're going to start today. We're happy to have you with us as we do. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
On the one hand, there's no doubt that Georgia's entered a brand new stratosphere for its program, having won back-to-back national champions. Go for 2 in 22. We spent a year talking about that. Georgia went out and did it. They got it. They are now the back-to-back dog national champions, we like to say. And you might think that there's like this whole different level of, I don't know if you'll call it achievement or whatever, that's unlocked because of that. And to some degree, maybe there is. And yet here we are kind of sitting now, because we do this show every single day. We're always looking ahead to whatever's next. We sort of sit in this position now of the very early stages of the offseason. We're right near the beginning of the calendar year with an entire, year's worth of preparation along the way towards the moment in which Georgia has a chance to do all of this over again. And believe me, we'll look forward in the time to come to talk about all of that. And as we're sitting here right now, even though Georgia has a much more crowded trophy case than it used to have, I can't help but notice that the overall conversation around Georgia this time of year, if we're only looking ahead to the future, I can't help but notice that it's actually not all that different than it would have been in the recent past. In fact, it is exactly the same. Here's the one thing you've heard me say, and some of you probably heard me say this more than you probably care to wish to, that championship football teams, great football teams, are always going to be made up of a collection of great players. I know that sounds like super elementary and super, simplistic, and maybe it is. Maybe it's overly simplistic. But the point here is that if you want to be a great team, you have to have a handful of like really high-end, top-end performers who propel your team to that. That you can't just be a bunch of good, that you've got to have a pretty good little handful of something that's more than that. You've got to have a good handful of great. And you can measure that in a lot of ways. You can measure that by first team all SEC. You can measure that by future first-round NFL draft pick. That might actually be the most effective way to measure all of this. You can measure that by like All-American stuff. Whatever designation you want to use, I think there's probably different ones that have, sort of different significance there on that. But one way or another, you better have top-end performers. You can't have a bunch of middle-of-the-pack players and have a, top-of-the-country type team. You have to have top-end players that propel that kind of team success. And so every year, it seems that we're asking the question at the beginning of the season, well, who are those guys going to be for Georgia? And it sort of seems like in every single year, we find ourselves, at this time of the year saying, okay, there are some new guys that are going to have to emerge. That if Georgia's going to be what it wants to be at the end of the year, there are some guys that have to emerge over the course of the year in order for that to be able to happen. And if you want to explain why it was that Georgia won a national championship in 2021, why it won a national championship in 2022, y'all, that's the story of it. Think about the way in which a guy like Devontae Wyatt kind of grew and emerged over the course of 2021. Trayvon Walker turned into the number 1 overall draft pick. Jordan Davis is probably already a little bit of a known commodity, but other guys kind of raised their level of play. And as they raised their level of play, the entire Georgia team benefited from it. And then all those guys were gone, 15, guys out, whatever else. And so you were looking at the 2022 team and you're like, gosh, this team on paper doesn't look anything like the 2021 team. And we would have sat here a year ago. In fact, I know that we did. We would have sat here a year ago and said, okay, Georgia can win the national championship again. Georgia can be right back in the same spot again, but there are going to have to be playmakers, stars, high-end performers emerge in order for that to be able to happen. And the story of last season for Georgia was the story of those players doing exactly that, growing into a bigger role, taking on more responsibility, just having more success. And throughout all of that, lo and behold, when it was all said and done, Georgia was right back where it had been the previous year. So here we are looking ahead at 2023. And once again, the exact same conversation is taking place. And just because Georgia won it in 2021, just because Georgia won it in 2022, just because they have gone for 2 in 22, if you will, just because of that, it actually does not make the task of cultivating new playmakers for 2023 any easier. It is still going to be an individual responsibility for the players who are in those roles to step up, to grow up, to thrive the way that previous players kind of did. So this is the time of year we always kind of ask the question of, well, who's that going to be? And I don't know if you're like me on this, but there's a part of this is just sort of fun, right? It's sort of fun to anticipate what the future is going to look like. It's sort of fun to anticipate who might finally ready to have their, their shot. And, Georgia fans like to have the debate internally amongst themselves this time of year of so-and-so touts for somebody and so-and-so touts for somebody else. And listen, it may be both, but different people kind of gravitate towards different names and just makes kind of a fun conversation. So let's kind of do our own part with that here a little bit today. And I'm happy to report that one of those names that has a chance to really grow into a bigger role, has a chance to be one of those kind of top-end performers that makes a championship season more likely. Believe it or not, he's actually already earning buzz to that regard and to that effect. Because when you think about Georgia's best players for next season, like the easiest name to give already on this is a guy like Brock Bowers. I mean, Brock Bowers is just simply put one of the best players in college football. That's been true for the last couple of years. This coming up in 2023, we expect to be his last season at Georgia, and Bowers is going to get the attention he deserves. He's just one of the very best. In fact, there was a story at CBS Sports the other day. Maybe it was just this morning. I guess I just saw it today. Maybe it just came out today. Tom Fornelli, a good writer, had his list of the 20 players that were at the top of the list for next season's NFL draft. In other words, the draft-eligible players coming back for college football in 2023. And as you might imagine, Brock Bowers' name was on that list. And on any list like this over the course of the next year, we're going to see Bowers each and every time. But there was another Georgia player on this list too, and this might be a little bit more off your radar, but it's kind of nice to see that one of the guys that could be a big contributor for Georgia next season already getting buzz to that effect. The guy that was mentioned here was cornerback Kamari Lassiter. Now, I want to show you what Tom Fornelli wrote about Lassiter at CBSSports.com. This is one of the 20 top draft-eligible players. So if you want to use that as a springboard here, then I guess it's easy to say that maybe somebody like Lassiter could be easily projected to be a first-round pick in next year's NFL draft, a year from now. This is what Fornelli says about Lassiter. He says, someone will tell you that Keely Ringo wasn't the best corner on the Georgia defense this season. Kamari Lassiter was. Fornelli says, well, I think they're both pretty great, and Lassiter is a good bet to get even better in 2023. That's Tom Fornelli, CBS Sports, and I find that to be really interesting because this is that time of year and we start to kind of make that list up. Okay, well, who are the players who've been good? Who are the players who've contributed? Who are the players who've played a role who are now ready for an expanded role? Who are now ready to be kind of the face of the program? Who are kind of ready to be kind of the bedrock that the type of success that Georgia's enjoyed in 2021 and 2022? Who are the players that are going to kind of be the bedrock that allows that success to continue in 2023? And here you are, we're barely into January, and you're already seeing buzz for a guy like Kamari Lassiter being one of those players. Now, to my eyes, I think that Lassiter had a really good season in 2022. I certainly think it is quite possible that he could be kind of one of those sort of top-end performers that we would say all championship teams kind of have, measured by first-team All-SEC or first-round pick, stuff like that. it certainly seems possible that Lassiter could be one of those guys, but you got to compile that list, right? You got to have about a half dozen names or so on that list. Bowers is the easiest to put there. Tom Fornelli, CBS Sports, says go ahead and throw Kamari Lassiter on there as well, and boom, now you got two. And you just need a few more, and all of a sudden you're kind of right back there in that national championship business once again. So it seems fair to ask, well, okay, well, if that's your first couple, if it's Lassiter and it's Bowers, well, who else now goes on this list of those sort of, playmakers, established bedrock members of your team that can be those kind of dominant top-end performers that the last two national championship teams from Georgia have had? Well, this is where an ESPN.com comes in, because one of the things they like to do is they're way too early college football projections. They'll do their top 25s and things like that. And pretty much everybody does a way too early top 25. But the other day, some of the ESPN writers also came out with their way too early All-American team for 2023. And a few more Georgia names kind of get added to this. Lassiter didn't make this list. Brock Bowers did. But you also start to see some other names on this All-American list. And all of a sudden you get a pretty good sense of who those expected top-end performers for Georgia are going to be next season. The bedrock, which could be another run towards another national championship. This is what ESPN had there on that. Connor Riley had a good story about this at DawgNation.com the other day. We'll talk to Connor more about this here in a moment. So Bowers on the list, as we said. Jamon Dumas-Johnson, no surprise there, the linebacker. Mikael Williams is on there as well. And I think Williams is certainly a very interesting player for this upcoming season, especially how he concluded this year being such a pivotal player in the national championship game. And then Malachi Starks as well. So all of a sudden you add Dumas-Johnson, Mikael Williams, Malachi Starks to the list that we're going to say already has Kamari Lassiter and Brock Bowers. And all of a sudden you're like at 5 right there. You haven't even gotten into what a guy like Amarius Mims can be for your offensive line, what the Georgia starting quarterback could be, depending on whoever that ends up being, and what you might do at the wide receiver position, and on you go. All of a sudden, the point, though, is that you're starting to put a list together of who those sort of best expected high-end, top-end performers could be. And when you start to see who's already in place here, and when you start to see who's ready to take that next step and the exciting growth that could happen for some of these players, and especially those that are moving kind of from like first year to second year in the program, all of a sudden that excitement, that anticipation for what could happen in 2023 does really start to build. That last year Georgia faced the questions of, well, how do you replace all you lost from 2021? And Georgia showed you they were more than capable of doing that. Maybe there'll be fewer people wondering if that's even possible this year just because of how emphatically Georgia answered that question. But it doesn't mean the task isn't still a challenging one, and it doesn't mean that a lot won't be required of the players who see themselves in expanded roles. But the fact that we've already got such a nice list growing gives you an idea that Georgia very much in the same conversation to begin this year that it was the last couple of years, right there in the mix for potentially another national championship. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and we're happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. Of course, we start at 9:45 on DawgNation.com and on the DawgNation app for our 1st and 15. And no matter how you join us via video, we're just happy to have you on that. Or maybe you join us on the radio, App and Sports Radio 960 Rev every day at noon. We appreciate that. Or as a podcast, Apple, Spotify, a lot of different ways for you to get in touch with our program. And we're just thankful you choose one of them and use it. And you're a part of what we do here each and every day. Really, really appreciate that. Also, great thanks to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia for making all of this possible there as well. You know, they're longtime friends of ours here at DawgNation Daily, which we're incredibly grateful for. And they're also proud partners of UGA there, too. So it's fun to do business with those that support the Dogs. We're certainly grateful when you do business with those who've helped support us. But also, I recommend Engineered Solutions of Georgia because they are a great name to know when you, as a homeowner, are potentially dealing with a very serious situation. About foundation, waterproofing issues. You know, we've had a little bit of rain here as of late, and when that rain shows up, maybe you see evidence of water where it's not supposed to be, wet spot in your garage, dampness down in your crawl space, or just flat out standing water down in your basement. I've heard some horror stories of people who come back from vacation, you walk down there, and boom, you got all that water down there in the basement, whatever else. Well, that's potentially, obviously something to be very, very concerned about. But that's what Engineered Solutions of Georgia wants to step up and help you with and help you on. Or if you have those cracks in your wall, signs of a foundation issue. Listen, Engineered Solutions of Georgia has an entire team of engineers on staff working to solve your problem and working to protect the structural integrity of your home. They understand how serious this is for you. And nobody else in our market can say they have that kind of resource, strength dedicated to your problems. So give them a call. They are a solutions-based company. The word solutions right there in their name. 678-ESOG now. That is 678-ESOG now. Proud partners of UGA, longtime friends of ours here at DawgNation Daily, and a great resource for you. If you've got foundation, if you've got waterproofing issues, check out Engineered Solutions of Georgia today. All right, we're going to get Jake Fromm here coming up in a little bit. That's going to be a fun conversation today. I'm going to talk with Jake about what's next for Georgia at the quarterback position as a new competition takes place. But before that, speaking of the quarterback spot, let's go around the DawgHouse, presented today by Georgia's own credit union. And yesterday, the most recent Georgia quarterback, Stetson Bennett, had a really cool honor. He was named as the winner of the Manning Award. Now, there's a lot of awards that go out there for the best quarterback in college football. Different, booster clubs and things like that give out those awards. The thing that makes the Manning Award special, and it was obviously a fitting win for Stetson Bennett because of this, it is the only quarterback award that takes into consideration your postseason performance. And obviously, Stetson Bennett certainly took his game to another level during the postseason, and so that is why he won the Manning Award. And so if you go to the DawgNation YouTube page, you can actually watch the full press conference that Stetson did with Archie Manning on behalf of the Manning Award. The Manning Award is given out via like the Sugar Bowl committee too. It's all kind of based out of New Orleans. So Manning's name's on it. It's the Sugar Bowl committee kind of gives that out. And it's a nice 20-minute press conference. Stetson obviously had, a lot to say. I think it's worth going back and just sort of hearing all of this. I'm going to play a little bit of the audio for you on this, but I don't have time to play everything that was meaningful from this press conference. He kind of talked about his sort of, feelings about playing his last game at Georgia and what he'll remember about his time at UGA. And so it's worth your time to kind of go back and hear this, but I did want to let you hear a couple things in particular, because as we're kind of talking about what's next for Georgia, and yesterday, we talked about the return of Cedric Von Granger and what that means for the Georgia offensive line. As Bennett reminded folks yesterday when he won this Manning Award, that part of the reason why he was able to win the award is because of how effective his offensive line was for him all season long. This actually led to kind of a funny remark from Archie Manning, who you'll hear here. But good stuff from Stetson Bennett on exactly why it was that he was in a position to even win an award like this. This is Stetson from yesterday.
Obviously couldn't be here without my teammates. And I don't know if you knew this, but I got sacked 9 times this year. So it's easy to throw the ball whenever you're not picking yourself up off the ground. And I think we had the greatest offensive line.
I beat that in one game in Chicago one day. I got sacked 11 times one game. So
in one game.
You should be very proud of that.
Wow. Yeah. So yeah. So Coach Searles, Coach Monk, getting the play calls right, and then those dudes up front, as you know, they don't get the glory, they don't get any of that stuff, but they do it because they love the team, and they are leaders of this one, and we, whenever we went because of them.
Yeah, so I think that's really good stuff from Stetson Bennett there on the subject of an offensive line that was just a dominant performer for UGA here this year. And I think you give Stacey Searles some credit for that. I think you give the players who played there some credit. We talked earlier about, kind of stepping up and emerging. Think about Broderick Jones. Last year he stepped up in the national championship game, played really well, and then you kind of spent the offseason wondering, okay, well, is he ready to kind of anchor an offensive line? Is he ready to be kind of the focal point at that left tackle position? And he proved to you there. He absolutely was. And the result of a guy like Bennett only being sacked 9 times, the very funny line from Archie Manning of, I got sacked more than that one game back when I played for the New Orleans Saints. But it just sort of speaks to the overall success that the Georgia offensive line was able to have for Bennett and the entirety of that offense here this year. And then beyond that, obviously one of the things we know for 2023 is that one of those key important pieces is coming back. A guy we spent a lot of time talking about yesterday, Cedric Von Granger. Well, Bennett was asked directly yesterday, how much does Van Pron's return as the center, how much does that also not just benefit the offensive line, but a transitioning quarterback? Bennett's time at UGA is done. Georgia's going to have a new starter next season. How much easier is that transition knowing that a guy like Van Pron is back manning the middle of that offensive line at the center position again? Once again, here's good stuff from Stetson Bennett on that.
Yeah, no, it's going to be Sed is that constant, right? He's the consistent. he doesn't get hurt. He doesn't do anything. He plays every single play and every single snap, and he wants to. He loves football. And I don't know if he loves his teammates or football more, which is, that's special, especially whenever it's that position, which, like I said earlier, they don't get the credit that they deserve. They don't get, the credit they deserve. And so Bassett doesn't care about that because he loves football and he loves his teammates and he's really good at it. And so, whether it's, he's going to help, whoever, Carson, Brock, Gunner, he's going to help an extreme amount, just with, if nothing more than the comfort level, because he's been there. He's been in the biggest stage. He's been in the biggest games, and he's performed, and he knows what it's like to be a leader. And he was that leader for us this year. And, even more so this coming up here, I imagine he knows that, hey, if we're going to do this again, we got to do it right. And so I have no doubt that he will.
I'm sure Stetson's probably saying, BA, as someone who's dealt with your own cough the last couple of days, you couldn't edit my coughing out of that. So I apologize to Stetson for not editing out the cough there in that clip. But I think that what he says about Cedric Von Pran is so well stated that if anybody understands what's at stake to come back for a chance to win a third national championship, and you start to make a list of, well, how many of the guys can really say they have all three of those championships? Well, obviously Van Pran would be one of the key guys in the middle of all of that. When you think about that, I mean, obviously Van Pran understands the weight of that, what's going to be required, and that's a really, really valuable thing to bring there to UGA just in general at the offensive line, but in the quarterback spot in particular, that there is something to be said for the talent that a quarterback has being tested in a different kind of way once you're in a football field and things are moving a little bit faster and you're kind of playing in a little bit different portion of the game than you used to play in, and finding some comfort, how quickly you can gain that comfort is going to go a long way in determining how successful you can be. And whatever sense of security you get from anything around you is going to be is going to matter. And obviously having a guy like Van Pran there to kind of calm it down, to at least you don't have to worry about the ball being delivered to you, right? That that's going to come the way that it's supposed to be. I mean, I think that Stetson Bennett does a really good job of laying out just how valuable Cedric Von Pran Granger's return is going to be for Georgia here this upcoming season. So congratulations to Stet for winning the Manning Award, and kind of a nice press conference to hear from him one more time, I guess kind of before we would say that his time there at UGA is now officially done as he walks away a winner of a quarterback award, the only one that takes the postseason performance into account. That is Around the DawgHouse, and it's presented today by our friends at Georgia's own credit union. And, of course, I'm excited about a vacation coming up here pretty soon. And as many of you have travel coming up here in 2023, you have plans for all of that. Make sure you take that Georgia's own credit union Visa Signature Platinum card with you when you're out there doing those things. Because when you're, paying for dinner or traveling around or, buying clothes to do fun things here in this new year, the stuff that you're already doing is actually even made more enjoyable when you get ready to use one of those Visa Signature and Platinum cards from our friends at Georgia's own credit union, because you get all kinds of, great benefits that can be used for cash back or travel or merchandise or so much more. You also can get up to $150 just for opening up one of these accounts. There are some restrictions that apply, so some things to check out. So make sure you take a look at all that online. Go to georgiasown.org for more details on that. That's georgiasown.org for more details on all of that. Great to have Georgia's own credit union with us for Around the DawgHouse here today. All right, as I told you, before we are done, we're going to have a very fun conversation. Speaking of quarterbacks, we'll get more in-depth with a lot of this with Jake Fromm about what it's going to be like in the kind of early stages of this year for the next Georgia starting quarterback, be it Carson Beck, who's kind of the backup this year, one of those younger guys who try to make a name for themselves there as well. How do you do that this time of year? What's this portion of the calendar like for the quarterbacks? We'll let Jake Fromm tell us more about that. We'll also talk here coming up about an Alabama coach that appears to be on his way out of Tuscaloosa. Second big departure off that coaching staff. Is this all part of Nick Saban's master plan? We'll try to figure that out, and kind of what does that mean, I guess, for the Crimson Tide, and not even in their comparison against Georgia, but in their fight just to qualify to play Georgia, something they were not able to do here this past season. So we'll talk about that there as well. And we will also get into now everything, kind of what we let off the show with, about, hey, the next transition to the next great crop of Georgia players, guys that are going to step up big for the Dogs. You're already starting to hear some predictions about who that's going to be and what that's going to all be about. So let's get ready to hear more about that. We're going to welcome in Connor Riley, as we do each and every week. Connor's had some great stuff at DawgNation.com over the course of the last couple of days. We've also had some fun video conversations as of late, reacting to the news as it's dropped with the Cedric Von Pron stuff and everything else that's out there. So we're going to do all of that here right now with him. And, of course, glad to have all of you with us on DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG as well.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Good to have Connor Riley here on DawgNation Daily today. As I said, Connor also did a great job yesterday covering the Manning Award that Stetson Bennett won. Got a chance to hear some interesting stuff from Stet there after that. Connor, I thought it was kind of an interesting way to kind of put a bow on the Bennett career here at UGA. We played some audio of him answering the question that you asked about Cedric Von Pron Granger's return, but also, his, respect for his offensive line, but also to kind of hear him talk about, how meaningful it was to kind of realize that national championship game was the last chance for all those guys to be together. You certainly could tell that meant a lot to him, and I was actually kind of happy to hear that he was able to spend some time in recent days kind of just sort of contemplating all of that. That's the kind of thing that most players will say they're not doing during the season. But after the season, I mean, I would say I hope they do stop and take some time to appreciate what it was they were able to accomplish. And I certainly got the impression yesterday that Stetson had done that.
Yeah, I did not have Stetson Bennett pegged as a Martin Scorsese big fan of the band with the Last Waltz reference that he made there.
Sure.
But I think it speaks to, again, those first couple of days right after the national championship, you and I can even attest to this. It's such a whirlwind. You're traveling across country. You're still taking in the fact that Georgia just won its second straight national championship. And so, when Stetson was asked on the celebration stage that Saturday in Sanford Stadium to sort of recount all his memories, that's hard to do in that point, just given it all been so fresh. So I think the fact that we heard from him yesterday and what he had to say, I think speaks largely to his Georgia experience and the reflection that he had back on both his relationship with Georgia, with the players, with the coaches, with the fans there as well. I think he took a much more holistic view of his time at Georgia, and I know some people weren't thrilled with how he conducted himself at the parade. But, again, I'm more than willing to give Stetson a pass for that, just given, the whirlwind nature of it all. And I think when you step back and look at the comments that he had yesterday, I think they're much more representative of his time and how he truly feels about all that he did as a Georgia Bulldog.
Yeah, I thought he did a nice job yesterday. I would really invite folks, if they missed it, to check out the DawgNation YouTube. It's about 20 minutes long. It's worth your time. Look, you want to consume content that kind of celebrates that national championship. I thought Bennett yesterday was certainly a great example of that. And I guess the other thing I kind of came away with from this conversation, Connor, is wondering, even though we've obviously given credit to the Georgia offensive line, I think a lot of us think they should have won the Joe Moore Award. Were they even a bigger part of the success this season than maybe even I've fully given them credit for and fully acknowledged them for? Obviously, as Bennett talked about, hey, a big reason why I'm here is the fact that I was only sacked 9 times, and obviously Archie Manning had the funny response to all of that. But Connor, do you think that there's a chance that the overall story of the Georgia offensive line this year was even a bigger factor in why they were able to go 15-0 than they've been given credit for?
Yeah, I think a lot of people hold that 2018, even that 2017 offensive line in high regard, just given, how quickly it has been flipped and the talent on that line. But, Broderick Jones is going to be a first-round pick. Warren McClendon is going to go play NFL football next year. And you bring back guys in Cedric Von Pron, Tate Ratledge, who are NFL players, Xavier Truss, who started a lot of games for Georgia. Amarius Mims has maybe a high ceiling as anyone that played on the offensive line this year. And then, obviously Devin Willock was a guy who played a big role on this team. When Warren Erickson, a guy who started the national championship game the year before for you, is your 8th best offensive lineman, I think it speaks to just the talent that is in that room there for this past season. And the numbers back that up as well. 9 sacks given up, that is the fewest ever in a 15-game season. They led the country in rushing touchdowns with 44. It was statistically the highest scoring offense that Kirby Smart had and the best in terms of yardage per game. And I think the big reason why in where this offense got to where it was this year was the improvement that this offensive line made from 2021 to 2022. And I think the strides that this group made, not just, year over year, but even within the course of the season. I mean, I remember sitting next to you in the Missouri game, and Georgia was really struggling in the first 3 quarters of that game. And when the game turned, it was because the offensive line came together and figured out how to start blocking Missouri and clearing paths and clearing holes that ultimately led to touchdowns for Georgia. And from really that Missouri game on, I thought they really just mowed down opposing teams. And look no further than the national championship game. Michigan very publicly won the Joe Moore Award this year. They gave up 4 sacks to TCU. TCU didn't touch Stetson Bennett. They had 0 sacks in that game, and I think that offensive line speaks to why the Georgia offense was as successful as it was this season.
So what I talked about at the top of the program, and this is something I talk about every year, Connor, that championship teams, if Georgia's going to be one again in 2023, going to have those top-end performers, future first-round picks, first-team All-SEC, All-American type guys, and I think we're already starting to see a little bit of that list form for Georgia for next season. I talked about some buzz that Kamari Lassiter got from a CBS writer, or I know you've written about the guys on the preseason All-American list from ESPN. Interesting to see a guy like Javon Bullard not, I guess, on that list, and that's, I think, probably a guy that's already one of Georgia's better players. Maybe a guy like Bear Alexander, some of our commenters in our audience have kind of pointed out to before. Maybe he's kind of a part of that there as well. I guess what I'm asking, though, is that do you think it's easier now to find those guys in the preseason than maybe it appeared to be before the start of the 2021 or the start of the 2022 season? Because if you want to go back to Georgia's last 2 national championship teams, in the preseason, you couldn't necessarily say for sure, oh, this guy's a surefire first-round pick. Some of those guys became that over the course of the season. Or this guy's a surefire, first-team All-SEC or whatever. A lot of that's kind of emerged for Georgia during the year. Do you see more established credentials for some of those kind of top-end performers going into this year than maybe we're used to seeing over the course of the last couple of years for Georgia?
I don't necessarily know if it's established credentials, but I think the national media is maybe now more willing to give Georgia the benefit of the doubt that sense. Like Amarius Mims, I think is going to be a first-round pick this time next year. But he's only started 2 games at this point in time. But I think by the time we get around to the preseason All-SEC team, like Mims is going to be a first-round selection there. Obviously, Brock Bowers is the best tight end in the country. Cedric Rampon is the best center in the country. So you feel good with what you have there. I think Kamari Lassiter is now going to sort of get the benefit of the doubt of, he's Georgia's number 1 cornerback. You've seen what they've had at that position in recent years. Darian Kendrick, Keely Ringo, even going back a little bit further. Eric Stokes, Tyson Campbell, the talent that they've had at that position. If this guy is good enough to carry that mantle, he's probably good enough to be an All-SEC and potentially a high draft pick player there. So I think there's a nice mix of, guys that have gotten the bump thanks to past success at this Georgia team, along with the fact that when you have really high recruited guys, that's going to naturally lead to more people believing that they're good. Michael Williams is a guy who's probably going to show up on a few All-American teams for next season, and he's a guy who, granted, only had 4.5 sacks this season, but had sacks in both playoff games. It was pretty impressive as he closed out his freshman year there. So I think it's a mix of, it just speaks to where the talent is on this Georgia roster, but now the fact that Georgia has proven that it can consistently win and reload its talent, that these players are going to start getting the benefit of the doubt the way, say, Alabama and Ohio State players have in years past.
I also think it's going to be really interesting to see how it emerges at some of what I would think of as like the premium positions. Obviously, quarterback's an example of that. That's going to be really important. But also, like, if we assume that, whichever tackle spot that Amarius Mims doesn't start at, that's a premium position. How well does the guy we would presume, maybe Ernest Green, how well does he emerge there? I think you got to have it with the defensive line because, honestly, that's the one thing that sort of separates the best of the SEC even the rest of college football is the talent along the defensive line. Do you have one of those big-time star players pop at defensive line and at edge rusher this year in a way that maybe you didn't have in 2022? That's an opportunity as well. To me, what's interesting about the playmakers, the star players, however you want to describe them for Georgia, it's how many of those guys emerge or what I would think of as kind of the premium positions. I think that also sort of speaks to just how clear of a path that Georgia maybe has to another like championship type season based on what happens at some of those kind of premium spots.
I'll say this about the defensive line because I went through, did depth chart this weekend, both offensive and defensive. Jalen Carter is really the only player of consequence they lose from this offensive line. And so you bring back Zion Logue, Nas Stackhouse, Warren Brinson, Tramel Waltauer, all guys who have played a ton of snaps for you before. And so you have a both veteran group and a group of bodies that you can comfortably rotate in there. And then you have the high upside guys like a Michael Williams, like a Bear Alexander, guys that we've seen make plays this season and have the ability to make more plays as they grow into their bodies more, as they become more accustomed to the college football life. Not to mention, Christian Miller is, I think, a player that people are interested in seeing what he does. Jordan Hall is a guy that I think is going to come in and compete for snaps right away as he's already on campus. And then, Jamal Jarrett, everyone compared him to Jordan Davis 2.0. Obviously, he's dealing with a foot injury right now, and, getting his weight under control is going to be something that he's going to have to deal with throughout the entirety of his career. But with that type of body type that he has, he's going to be able to find his way on the field if he's able to get himself in playing shape, because Georgia doesn't have another player like him. And I think like we saw with Jordan Davis way back when he was a freshman in 2018, if you have that kind of body type and are able to have an impact on Georgia's run defense, they have no issue throwing you out there for a down or two and clogging things up there. And so I think with this defensive line, obviously I think the big keys are going to be, can Michael and can Bear Alexander maximize their potential in year two? But this defensive line this year has a chance to be every bit as good as that 2021 unit was. But I think a lot of it is ultimately going to come down to how Michael Williams performs and how Bear Alexander grows into sort of that Jalen Carter role that we saw him fill these last two seasons.
So since you bring up those depth charts, I want to kind of finish with that conversation here and doing some of that kind of stuff. Listen, I can't get that soon enough, right? I'm already into some of this kind of stuff. I think it's really, really fun. What jumped out at you as you were kind of, I guess, sort of rough drafting some of this kind of stuff in terms of position battles that are going to be interesting, depth chart stuff that kind of already stands out? What's interesting about that right now in your eyes?
Yeah, I think the two things that really caught my eye on this is, one, the edge rusher position, especially if Marvin Jones Jr. ends up missing time this offseason, like I think a lot of us expect him to, given he's had a shoulder injury since he showed up at Georgia this past fall. What does that position group look like? Because it's really just Chaz Chambliss and then a bunch of guys we don't know a whole lot about. Maybe you can put Jalen Walker there, because I think Jalen Walker is a guy that's talented enough to where he needs to be on the field, whether it be at that inside linebacker position or as an edge rusher. And then with Cedric Von Prawn coming back, I think the hardest guy that Georgia has to replace is Chris Smith. And there's not a logical replacement there, but I think Georgia can get creative. Maybe you move Javon Bullard to that safety spot. I think he's got the ability to do that, and maybe that allows you to play Smoke Bowie at that star spot, or vice versa, keep Javon Bullard at that star spot where we saw him make a lot of plays in the college football playoffs, and then maybe have Smoke Bowie step in at that safety spot. I'll be interested, because there are obviously a lot of options there that they can go with at safety. Dan Jackson, David Daniels at Savannah. Gino Aguero is a player a lot of people are interested in seeing how he comes in and plays right away. So I think that safety spot is the one where, I'm not going to say it's a concern for Georgia, but I'll be very interested in seeing what they end up doing opposite Malachi Starks when they have to go about replacing Chris Smith. Yeah,
I think that Smoke Bowie's a really interesting name in a lot of this, because, obviously this is a very talented player, and clearly when a school like Georgia goes out and gets a guy like this in the transfer portal, they do so with intent to use him. And yet the sense that I get is that, man, he has potentially he's obviously a very versatile type player, and it just sort of seems a little bit mysterious about exactly what his best fit for Georgia could possibly be. When you look a little bit deeper at Bowie, I guess kind of you give me some more thoughts on how you think a school like Georgia can use him.
Well, yeah, he's a guy, I know Kirby has said, and people have said, that he can play all three spots. I don't think he's going to be a cornerback for this team. But, I can't help but wonder if he just chooses to sign with Georgia originally instead of going to Texas A&M. Are we looking at him as a much more surefire starter this year than wondering where exactly he might be lining up? And maybe that's a lesson going forward for future players, because I think Georgia always sort of had a plan for Bowie. I believe they're going to probably try him at star, and I think at first they're going to maybe move Javon Bullard to that safety spot, see what you can get out of him there, maybe give him some more responsibilities as he enters his third year at Georgia here, knowing that, hey, if Bullard can't quite handle that safety spot, you can move him back to star, and you still keep one of your better defenders on the field. And so with Bowie, the big thing is going to be, how quickly does he get up to speed? Does he cause any distractions or struggles at all? Because, this is sort of a second chance for him coming in from Texas A&M, where he did not have a great first year in college football, and I think he probably knows that he's on a very short leash here at Georgia. And so with that, he's got to be on his best if he's going to make an impact right away, because Georgia does bring back Tyke Smith at that star position. Marcus Washington Jr. is a guy I think that could potentially play snaps for them if he takes steps in his development for them this year. So, Bowie's an interesting player, as you point out, but he's really got to put everything he can into this, because I do think he's talented enough to get on the field, but it's not going to be like walking in and grabbing a starting job like you see some transfer players do. I think he's absolutely going to have to go out there and earn it, and that's not going to be an easy thing to do for a guy who this is his first few weeks, months in this very tough and rigid Georgia football program that we've heard multiple people say isn't for everyone.
Let me just squeeze this in really quick. This is not something I had planned to ask, but I probably need to. Bill O'Brien looks like he's about to become the Patriots offensive coordinator here. That's a name that's been kind of mentioned in concert with Todd Monken, but as we said on Friday, it seems like everybody knew, worst kept secret in the world was O'Brien wanted an NFL job. Maybe he felt like he needed one. Maybe he'd worn out his welcome in Tuscaloosa. In the case of Todd Monken, it hasn't been quite as clear about maybe what he wants. Any additional chatter on this out here about the Tampa Bay Bucs opening, how Todd Monken might fit into that? Any new buzz coming out of that at all, Connor?
No, not really. And the thing to keep in mind with NFL coaching searches is that those are a lot more public and that teams will put that information out there freely. And so we'll know if and when Todd Monken does interview for an offensive coordinator job with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I believe as it stands right now, there are now 7 offensive coordinator openings with Bill O'Brien going to be the New England Patriots offensive coordinator. And so we'll see how those get filled out. Thomas Brown, a name a lot of Georgia fans know, former running backs coach here and former alum, he is interviewed for multiple offensive coordinator jobs with the Washington Commanders and Los Angeles Chargers there. So these roles are going to fill up fast. And right now, from my reading of it, Tampa Bay is still the only team that has really mentioned Monken as a possible option there. And the fact that he still, at least publicly, has not interviewed yet, and I do believe that would get out given, Tom Brady and the circus that seems to be following Tampa right now. I do think that if he interviewed, that would be out there. And the fact that he hasn't, it does speak to the fact that maybe we do ultimately end up seeing him back at Georgia, which, as I sit here on, January 24th, I do believe that Todd Monken will be back at Georgia next season. But obviously there's still a long way to go, and he could ultimately, end up being blown away by an NFL opportunity.
Connor, really thorough answer. Appreciate that. Good to have you on the program today. We'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yep, as always, it's a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
And, of course, Connor, one of 2 guests in the show today. We'll catch up with former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm here coming up in just a moment. We'll have a fun time talking to Jake here. Before that, though, we're going to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Of course, it is showtime, go time. We are getting down to the absolute crunch time on that second ever cruise with DawgNation. We're going to be leaving out of Port Canaveral on April 24th. We're going to be going to a Perfect Day, Coco Cay, that wonderful private island right there in the Bahamas. And listen, I would say that if you're just kind of first getting acquainted with Royal Caribbean, that may be the thing you want to start with right there in terms of what makes it a different kind of experience, or for those of you who've maybe, mostly taken land-based vacations in the past, why you might want to really investigate what Royal Caribbean's all about here. Look at the fun things that you can do on board a Royal Caribbean cruise ship when you go to Perfect Day Coco Cay. It's a private island in the Bahamas. The only people who get to go there, this is like this sort of like oasis. It's this magical thing. The only people who get to go to this private island are those that are on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship. It's exclusive benefit for those on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. So many of the itineraries that Royal Caribbean sort of sails with, that includes a stop off at a Perfect Day Coco Cay, and that's going to be our DawgNation cruise as well. So people are getting excited about it. We are so thrilled to have you on board there for that. In fact, there may be sort of limited final opportunity to get involved here. Jessica Slater, great travel agent, she can help you with that. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also check out a website that Jessica has made specifically for our DawgNation cruise. It's called RoyalDogs.com. That is RoyalDogs.com. You can get the information there. You can get everything you need for this great experience, the second ever cruise with DawgNation this upcoming spring. We want you there. We want you to be a part of it. And I want you to explore your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation for you, your family, your friends, everything else. I know my family, we're really looking forward to a great cruise here coming up in really just a few weeks' time now. We feel like we kind of need a vacation, and we're ready for it. And obviously, we're thrilled to be doing that with Royal Caribbean. So hopefully you have that great experience for yourself there as well. All right, let's transition now. Let's talk about cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. As we were saying with Connor Riley a moment ago, you have a number of reports out there that looks like Bill O'Brien is set to kind of return to New England and be offensive coordinator with Bill Belichick there once again. Now, the read that you get on this is that, hey, maybe he feels like he needs to go to New England. Maybe he feels like he needs to go back to the NFL. Not to say he won't be successful there. It's obviously a former NFL head coach, so clearly, being a coordinator in this league is the kind of thing that he probably feels like he can, once again do successfully. But maybe he feels like he needs to make that move because it's maybe just the worst kept secret out there that Nick Saban has just sort of grown tired of this offense and not happy with that. I mean, I think one of the things it speaks to here is that a lot of the success that Alabama has had in recent years has really kind of been coordinator dependent. And to Saban's credit, when he hired Lane Kiffin at the start of the 2014 season, that was obviously a big change for Nick. And he's so proud of himself for his willingness to change and adapt and learn new tricks, things like that. But really, it was what happened after that I thought was more interesting because it seemed like the Alabama offensive success, if anything, not only did not dip, but if anything, it may have increased because, Saban proved himself to be a pretty good hire of talent. Brian Dable's head coach in the NFL now. That was a guy that ran this offense in 2018. Identifying Steve Sarkisian, Mike Locksley, who's a head coach at Maryland. Saban made a series of good offensive coordinator hires that allowed this team to be really what it decided it wanted to be, which was kind of a finesse-oriented passing offense, less about defense, less about running the football. That's where Saban thought the sport was going. And he had coordinators that he was able to outsource some of that coaching responsibility to, and they were able to kind of instill all of that in there. But when you don't have a coach at the level, I would say Steve Sarkisian was probably the best of the play callers that Alabama had, in this recent era. When you don't have a coach that quite operates at that same level, and I don't believe that Bill O'Brien has ever come close to matching that, well, then all of a sudden Alabama having the same feel that it used to have, well, all of a sudden that becomes a little bit hard to do. And I would say that even this year when you had a guy like Will Anderson on defense and a guy like Bryce Young as your quarterback, I still think that Young, is a sensational quarterback, even though guys like Caleb Williams got more attention. I still think that Bryce Young is a sensational quarterback. But the point is, even with that sort of star type, talent offense and defense, those sort of household names guys there, it almost seemed like Alabama was just sort of missing a little bit of an identity, missing a little bit of a defining characteristic. And I think the inability of a Pete Golding on defense and Bill O'Brien on offense kind of put their stamp on this team there from that situation. I think that sort of explains, kind of why maybe they're looking for new homes right now, or why they've kind of found new homes right now, is because I'm just not really quite sure what kind of stamp they put on this team here for this past season. And when you start to look ahead to the future, I think the new Alabama offensive coordinator steps into kind of an interesting role, because here's the one thing you also kind of have going on right now. You have a lot of uncertainty about who your quarterback's going to be for this upcoming season. And I'm not quite so sure that the Alabama rival in the SEC West, their chief competition, the team that actually won the division this year, LSU, I'm not quite so sure that LSU doesn't have two quarterbacks right now with Nussmeier and Jane Daniels who are better than anything that Alabama has on its roster. Now, we may find out that Alabama's got a really good quarterback like Ty Simpson waiting in the wings or something like that, but I don't know that Jalen Milroe feels like that guy right now. So, look, Alabama's obviously still a formidable program, and they're going to still mount a serious challenge in the SEC West, you would assume, here for 2023. But you would also assume that this offseason feels a little bit different than some in Tuscaloosa have felt like. This feels like a period of transition. And just given what has happened to Alabama in recent years, it can't be quite so obvious that Alabama's going to handle that transition the way you once assumed they possibly would. This is very much an off-season to watch. What happens there with the Crimson Tide should be interesting to see. I'll finally finish with this. So where Jacob Hood, the former Georgia offensive lineman, is also now become, I guess, the third dog to land with Nebraska. We had some commenters earlier in the comment section that said, you got to start calling them the Corn Dogs from now on, because you've got three former Georgia players now on this Nebraska roster right there in the middle of corn country with the Corn Huskers. So that's pretty funny stuff. And obviously, if you're starting a brand new, coaching regime there in Lincoln, Nebraska, I guess the worst thing you could do, not the worst thing you could do, is seeing how many former dogs you can populate on your roster as a way of maybe kind of filling out your overall talent level. So maybe that's a smart thing there for Nebraska to do at the start of a brand new coaching regime. So I guess congratulations to Jacob Hood on finding a new home there on that. And we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And we'll also get ready, as I said before, to talk to the former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm here on all of this. We'll get into the subject of Georgia's own offseason and what's going to happen specifically maybe at the quarterback position with a guy who's so good about talking about all of this. It is Jake Fromm here now, a Kroger Fresh Take here on DawgNation Daily today. Jake, we appreciate your time. Thanks for being with us. Hope you're doing well.
Hey, Brandon. Yes, sir. Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So I guess before we get into anything else, let's talk about your situation here for a little bit. How's your off season going? Obviously kind of finishing up a year with the Commanders there, looking ahead to the future. Kind of what's on your horizon here right now, and I guess how would you evaluate your time with Washington here this year?
Yeah, Washington was great. Finished up really well and on a good standing. Signed a futures contract there going into next year. So excited about OTAs. And right now just kind of getting back home to Athens. Me and my wife have a house here. Just kind of knocking out some things around the house, trying to shoot a few ducks before duck season goes out. And, just trying to have some fun, enjoy a little bit of off time.
Now, I hope you do get a chance to enjoy that, Jake, because I know that's an important thing for sure. As far as the Georgia situation goes, it's an interesting time in the fact that for a guy like Carson Beck, Gunnar Stockton, Brock Vandegrift, they're all going to try to compete to become the starting quarterback of this team. And obviously spring practice is a big part of that. But the sense that I get, not having been a player, but just kind of following this from afar a little bit, the sense that I get is that there's also a real opportunity right now to earn the faith and trust. Maybe it's coaches, maybe it's the fellow teammates. What's a quarterback's job right now, especially for one who wants to kind of make a name for himself as a potential starter? What's a quarterback's job like this time of year as a way of kind of taking that reign of leadership before spring practice even begins?
Yeah, it's time to go to work. They have these winter workouts coming up here soon, and for them it's a lot about getting in shape and getting their bodies ready. But really, it's a lot about mental toughness. It's about finding who the leaders are on the team, who's going to step up and be the guy. And it's a great opportunity for Carson, for Brock, and for Gunnar, even to show up and say, hey, I want to be the guy. This is my team. I'm going to grab it by the reins, and I want to drive this boat. So it's a great opportunity for those guys.
When you first arrived at Georgia, the sense that I think we all got is that you kind of became pretty comfortable with this pretty fast. And I'm always kind of fascinated by that because, you'd just been in high school, and obviously, you have self-confidence as an athlete and things like that, but it's still a much different thing to kind of step onto a college campus and feel comfortable enough in your own skin to kind of do the things that an SEC quarterback's asked to do. Kirby obviously gave you a good bit of praise there in like that first summer, even before the season began, as a guy that was kind of pushing for playing time and doing some things like that. How was it that you were able to kind of make that transition and just be comfortable becoming a college player so quickly with the additional responsibilities that kind of ask from a quarterback?
Yeah, for me, I was very confident in my abilities, and I knew what I was good at. I was confident in how I worked, and I think guys fed on that. I want to be able to be as close to the line. I want to be confident, but I want to be as close to the line of cocky as I can be with being on the confident side. I think guys respect work. I think guys respect being authentic, and that's what I was, and that's what I think it's going to take for whoever wants to be the guy at quarterback. Is going to have to be real, be authentic, be willing to work, be willing to put in extra work. I think guys are going to feed off that. It
seems like, too, and I think this is what you're saying, that, if you tried to fake that, if you tried to, put on an air that's maybe not authentic, people would just see right through it, right?
Oh, man, they see right through it, and really it does even worse for you than just being real and being who you are. And I think that speaks for football, speaks for being a quarterback, speaks for in life in general as well.
One of the guys that's been in kind of the news here a little bit lately is Todd Monken. There's some, some maybe discussion out there of would a guy like this one go back to the NFL? Is that something he'd have interest in? Some of the NFL reporters have kind of mentioned his name. What do you think makes Todd Monken? And as someone that's kind of still around the program from time to time and obviously knows the position, knows the offense, what impresses you about what Todd Monken does on kind of a day-in, day-out basis in terms of how he orchestrates this offense?
Yeah, he has a ton of experience in the league, and being able to bring those ideas, the way they play around with formations and personnel and those kind of concepts, bring them into the college level. And what they did at Georgia and on the offensive side of the ball was just incredible. You have weapons, but when you can utilize your weapons and get the most out of them in any given situation, I think that's what it really takes you a step. It differentiates you as a coordinator. Say, hey, every offense is going to have a weapon or two, but how can I get the most out of my weapons? And I think that's what he did best, was getting the most out of those guys and being able to change it up week to week about who's going to get the football and be able to see the weaknesses on each team and go after it.
One of the other things that's been kind of talked about here a little bit lately is we found out that Georgia wide receiver, former Georgia wide receiver A.D. Mitchell, now going to Texas. And this is one of those things, Jake, where I think a lot of fans sometimes, they're not quite so sure how they want to feel about this. On the one hand, you're obviously really thankful for a guy like Mitchell who has contributed a lot to the program. Big catch against Ohio State, big catch against Alabama. On the other hand, for some fans, it's one of those deals where, hey, transfer portal and maybe NIL, something like that, it's kind of, to their eyes, sort of threatening the sport they feel like they know and have loved for a long time. How do you process that? Obviously, you kind of played in kind of the precursor to all of this, but how do you kind of process the fact that a guy like AD could win a national championship here and then kind of go bolt and go play for Texas right after that?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's just, I hate to say it this way, but it's just kind of the life we live now. That's just college football. It's just the way it is now. And it's tough, and it does take a kind of a little bit out of it. But, I understand. I think he has family there in Texas, and obviously some of the NIL stuff helps too as well. So, hey, look, we understand. Obviously, hate to have him go, but from my perspective, I can understand it. But obviously, I would love to have him here, contributing here. He's done a lot for our program and made a big time play when it really was needed. And so he will be remembered and respected for that as well.
It's our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here on DawgNation Daily here today. And by the way, speaking of Kroger, they get all kinds of fan favorites coming up for all your football watching stuff as we're going to head to the end of the pro football season here. You can shop your local Kroger for home chef chicken wings, game-decorated cupcakes, veggie trays, and so much more. As you might imagine, I'm a little bit more into the cupcakes and the wings and the veggie tray, but nonetheless, whatever you're into, Kroger's got you on all of that. Check out Kroger.com/football for more on that. Kroger.com/football for more on that. Jake, we'll finish with this. We heard Stetson Bennett a little earlier talking about how valuable it's going to be for Georgia next season to have Cedric Von Pron-Granger coming back at the center position. As a quarterback yourself, how nice would it be for you to know that if I'm a brand new starter stepping in for the first time, I've got a center who's been, probably the best in the country multiple years now, coming back for his final year as a big leader, but also a great security blanket right there in front of me snapping the football. How valuable is that for whoever the Georgia starting quarterback turns out to be?
Look, that is huge. That is a big-time asset that you have in your back pocket. That's a guy who can take something off your plate. I had something very similar in my situation when I came in. I had an experienced guy, Lamont Galliard, playing center for me, knew the offense, knew it well, and it really helps kind of take something off your plate as a fresh and a new quarterback when you're worried about so many different things like, hey, did the guys line up right? Where's the play clock? Wait a minute, what's the play here? What's the situation? And so you're just thinking about so many things that didn't come quite as quick to you. And that's going to be a huge help for whoever is back there taking snaps.
I think that's really well said, Jake. We're glad to have you back in Athens. Hope you get a chance to enjoy a little bit of time off, and we'll look forward to getting a chance to speak to you next week, too.
Yes, sir. I look forward to it. Thank you, Brandon.
Good stuff there, Jake Fromm, as a part of our Kroger Fresh Take. Also, before we get ready to wrap up today's show, too, I want to give a shout-out to our friends at Discover Dunwoody. There's all kinds of things going on from time to time where you kind of want to be – you got, meeting space going on. You got, opportunities to sort of get folks together. Well, when you think about, some of the places that you want to be and be a part, I want you to think about our friends at Discover Dunwoody here. A great, great spot for some great, great hotels and a really convenient location to get you close to businesses from Buckhead to Alpharetta because, listen, the Discover Dunwoody area, the Dunwoody area in which our studios are located and so many of these great Dunwoody hotels are located, very, close access to like the Dunwoody MARTA station, Sandy Springs station is not too far away from here, but also great shopping, great restaurants. So if you've got business going on in the Atlanta area where you need to be in Buckhead or you need to be in Alpharetta or something like that, but you want somewhere kind of fun to stay where you can go shopping, have a great meal, have a great experience, right here in this Dunwoody area, it's a great place to know. Family-friendly environment. Fun to kind of walk around at night, fun to try out some restaurants, really, really comfortable, nice hotels, convenient access to two different MARTA stations. Just a great place to be when you need to be in the Atlanta area for business. I want you to think about the Dunwoody area as a way to do that. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to discoverdunwoody.com/DawgNation. That's discoverdunwoody.com/DawgNation. And, of course, Discover Dunwoody thrilled about Coach Smart and the entire Dog National Championship team from this past year from UGA. So they're thrilled about that. They're a big part of the entire Go for 2 in 22 season that we had, but also a great resource for you as you're making your business travel plans here in 2023 in the Atlanta area. Think about Dunwoody. Discover Dunwoody.com. Convenient to wherever you need to be for whatever business you need to get done. So make sure you check them out today. Discover Dunwoody.com/DawgNation. Check that out today. All right, a couple of good golden shoes to wrap things up for us here today. I'll start with the first one. Our buddy Hayes Calloway sent this in. And so I think one of these prizes may be better than the other. So I'll start with one on the left. He says, going back to 2017, we had an event called DawgNation DawgNation Appreciation. And so one of the things they did for fun was they made those big blow-ups of like some of our faces, including mine. And so Hayes says, I was lucky enough to get one of your cutout heads, the DawgNation Appreciation in 2017. Now, what's sad to note is that cutout head on Hayes' wall there is actual size. That's actually how big my face and head are. So that's a troubling thing to consider, but funny nonetheless. I'm glad to see that Hayes has had a good time with all of that. That's really good to see. And great collection of some of those framed photos from people there that night. But also about the new picture frame, the back-to-back Dog National Champions. Love to see that. Hayes, that's really, really good stuff. So we'll give you a golden shoe there as well. You've already got that framed on your wall. One more to give out there as well, too. I thought this was really funny there as well. Obviously, Florida, the embarrassing situation, not able to come up with the money for Jaden Rashada. Joshua Campbell making fun of that, saying, Sunbelt Billy's talking to Jaden Rashada about the NIL. He says, we ain't got no cash in it. Yeah, that's about right. Unfortunately, that's the situation with the Florida Gators these days. Joshua Campbell having some fun at Billy Napier's expense. We love to see that. So Josh will give you a golden shoe there as well. And then speaking of the lousy, stinking Gators, how about a Gator Hater countdown? 277 days from right now. Georgia back in Jacksonville, beaten up on Florida again. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cooldown. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price promised. So I've had like a little cough thing kind of stuck in my throat now for a minute. I'm going to have to cough. Excuse me. So hopefully we're cleared up now and ready to go. We can kind of roll through the cool down now that I've gotten that out of the way. Miriam Corbin says the DawgNation appreciation was 27. By the way, how about Miriam on YouTube here? Says the appreciation was awesome. One of my first visits to the Battery. Miriam, I'm glad you still have good memories of that. I do as well. It was really fun. Let's see what else. B2B Visor says SVP coming back is as big as when Jordan Davis did it. I think that's probably about right. I do. Paul Moon says Billy Napier's about to be Florida's version of Brian Harsin. I think that's really funny. JJ shouting out Darius Smith Sr. I always love to see that. Albert Murphy says, I grew up in Oakwood. Same I was talking about yesterday, kind of growing up in Oakwood. He says, I have a large family that has been in Oakwood and on the lake. My grandfather's farm was up by the lake as well. Would love to have a conversation with you sometime. Yeah, Albert, maybe we can do that. I'd love to do that too because I was an Oakwood guy through and through. For sure, Albert. I'd love to do that. Let's see what else. Let's see what else is going on here. Let me plug in my phone. I'm going to lose my laptop if I don't plug this thing in. There you go. Let's see what else. Miriam Corbin says she sure wishes G-Day was this Saturday. I know your feeling on that, Miriam. I definitely do. It'll be here before you know it, though, and that's good to know. Spencer Clark says he likes my drip today, meaning my hoodie. I appreciate that. A little cold where we are, so a little fleecy sweatshirt feels very good today. It does indeed. Scott Harris says there was a golf shop in Oakwood he used to go to. I can't remember the name. I can't remember what that would have been. I can't quite remember that, but yeah, it was a great place to live and grow up. Wally Smith says when's Deuce Robbins going to commit? Deuce is going to be right there on National Signing Day, so February 1st, right there at the beginning of the month. Right there at the beginning of the month there on that. Reggie Fly says, how you feeling about the wide receiver room? I mean, I would say even with kind of, obviously, you got the thing with Rah-Rah up in the end. You have no idea where that's all going from here. Still too early to kind of interpret what might be going on there. But, I mean, I still think that Georgia has a chance of obviously fielding a very formidable group there. The one thing that I think that's going to be noticeable about this Georgia wide receiver unit this year is this is probably the fastest group they've ever had. And, I mean, it's pretty obvious that Georgia has made a concerted effort to upgrade its speed. And I would say that that's going to be noticeable about this Georgia group is they're going to be a much faster collection of wide receivers than we're used to. Miriam Corbin said that Facebook never came up today. Is that right? Let me check on that. Miriam said that Facebook never came up. Maybe she just didn't get a notification because we're on Facebook right now. So maybe just didn't get a notification. I'm not sure, but we are on Facebook. Well, either way, Miriam, I'm glad you found a place to be with us. I am. Michael Wilson says, watch your show from 9 countries and numerous states while in military operations. First of all, Michael, thank you for your service to our country. That's amazing to hear, and I appreciate your loyalty to us, and that's awesome that you've taken us with so many different places. I myself have not visited 9 countries, but I'm happy to know I've visited 9 countries along the ride with you, so that's nice to know. Jonathan Aaron talking about me growing up traveling in a car that didn't have seatbelts in it. Yeah, that's indeed the case. Jay Shipe says, what's up with the 248 hours between YouTube starts? I started on YouTube today, Jay. Let's see what else. Jerry Dog fan, do you think that Stetson will get drafted? Yeah, I think he will. Like, I'm not a draft expert. That's not my thing. I mean, some of y'all may say I'm not an expert on anything, which I guess is probably a fair description maybe. But I'd be surprised if Stetson doesn't get drafted. So, I mean, I think that, there's obviously that sort of range, kind of 4th to 7th round, something like that. I would imagine that's the case. I mean, the one thing you hear more people say now is, well, if guys like Brock Purdy are doing what they're doing, how come Stetson couldn't do that too? And I guess there is no obvious answer why that couldn't be the case. Let's go asking about Roderick Robinson, how he fits into the situation with Branson Robinson and Kendall Milton. Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, I have to admit something that given the way that Roderick concluded his high school career, I think you have to give, or at least I think I should have to give him a lot more consideration than maybe at one point in time I was giving him. I mean, I'm not saying that I was overlooking him as a signee or a commit when he was that or anything. I'm just saying that, it's easy to kind of get lost in the shuffle. And a guy way out in California, I'm not really quite so sure, I had full appreciation for who he was as a player. But when you watch, I think even a little bit banged up there at the end of his career, when you watch the way in which he was, kind of churning it out, I think that you're left to be very, very impressed with what he did, obviously. And you look ahead to the, to the possibility that, yeah, he is going to be a big factor. I think the running back competition, in other words, is going to be very interesting. I do. I think running back competition is going to be very interesting. Let's see what else. Rhodey Williams says, which game do you want more, a night game or a blackout? I want a night game. I mean, like the blackout I'm fine with one way or another. But, it'd be nice to have just a true night game. And I just don't know if it's ever going to happen, but it'd be nice. It'd be nice for it. It'd be nice for it to happen. Let's see what else. Lynn Johnson Shipman. Yeah, so here's the thing, is that over the course of time, Facebook has just gotten less and less reliable about sending out notifications. They just don't send them out. And there's just nothing we can do about it. The only thing that we can do in response to that is we just try to create more platforms to have the show on, because that's, part of the reason why, one of the main reasons why, the number one reason why, we've kind of built out the DawgNation platform on DawgNation.com. You just watch the show right there. Part of the reason why we put so much emphasis in building that up was because the fact that Facebook had just kind of become a little bit more unreliable in terms of, connecting us with our audience the way that it once had. And so what I would tell you is if you're a regular to the show, you cannot depend on that notification to come as far as getting here because Facebook just doesn't send it out anymore. They just don't do it. They have a right to, I guess, do whatever they want to do, and they've just decided to. I'm not saying they're shadow banning us, but it does sort of sound cool to say it that way. But they're not doing it to us on purpose. They just don't. I don't think they send out notifications on anything anymore like they used to. So if you are regular to the show, just know that, I was sick as a dog on Friday. We still didn't miss. So we don't miss shows. So I may be gone for a week, but even those will have, the pre-records and things like that. So we're here. We're going to be here. Now, if you can't be every day, totally understand. You get busy, you got stuff going on. But just know we're always here for you. So if Zuckerberg doesn't ding you, just know we're still here. Yeah, Isha Murphy says he didn't get one either. So there you go. Let's see what else. Yeah, Rick Martin also no notification. Adam Henderson either. Yeah. They've just gotten to where they don't send them. They've just gotten to where they don't send them. Let's see what else. Yeah, Laura Woodard, sorry about that, but I'm glad you found your way over here. I appreciate that. EB Senior says, I'll tell you what, I've definitely enjoyed the last 2 off seasons, the defending champs. No matter who stays or goes, it's easier to deal with that for a championship. And I do think that's the case. And listen, I know that I know there's been a lot going on. I certainly understand that. But I think the ability to kind of soak all this up and appreciate it for what it is and just be really grateful that most fans will never have the experience that all of us been able to have here over the course of these last couple of seasons. I think being able to fully appreciate that, I do think is an important thing. And EB, I'm glad that you are. Celicia Gagnon asking about signing day rate or outside the current status quo. That's a good question. Is there anything really even left in terms of the thing that I'm already pretty interested in is it sort of feels like the 2024 cycle sort of already started. And I don't mean to disrespect Deuce Robinson by saying that. I guess like the one thing I would watch for on the Robinson front is there any chance that a school like USC tries to make a late push? That's like, I guess, the one thing I'd be watching for here. It seems like that Robinson and Georgia have a very strong relationship, and I'm not a reporter, so I'm not reporting this. But I guess I'd be a little bit curious of, is there any kind of last gasp on a USC on a situation like that? That's what I'd be kind of watching for a little bit. But I think the 2024 cycle is already shaping up to take a very, very interesting look here. And so it sort of feels like we're kind of already in the early days of the 2024 cycle a little bit. Kyle Cummings pointing out I have not mentioned Dylan Bell. Listen, I'll refer you back to what Terrence said about Dylan Bell before the start of last season. Terrence liked Dylan a lot, and I do think that Dylan's going to be heard from. So if I haven't mentioned him enough, that's my bad, because I do think I think he has an important part of this conversation. Matt Rukavina says it's going to be a minimum 18 months we last lost a game by the time the 2023 kicks off. Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. It really is remarkable. Let's get a few more. Over here at DawgNation.com. Big Dog talking about George Kittle looking like Brock Bowers. That's actually really interesting. That's really interesting, Big Dog. That's funny. Senior Dog 54 says that Brock Bowers is a generational talent for us, like Champ Bailey and, dare I say, Herschel Walker. In terms of just like the outsized ability, I don't think that's an unfair comparison. I really don't. A Champ Bailey or a Heinz Ward or a Herschel Walker, I think that Brock Bowers is kind of in that discussion in terms of the wow factor of how he plays the game. And, I still think that Bowers' greatness isn't always fully appreciated because he plays on a team that has a lot of other great players as well. But man, when you see that football in his hands, you are left to conclude that is something really, really special. Let's see what else. Rambo says, I'd love to see our defense as dominant early in the season will allow confidence building at the quarterback position. He says Bauer's a great security blanket. Yeah, that's another nice weapon for a quarterback to have. And, I just think that I get your point about a dominant defense making it easier for the quarterback transition. I think that's true. There's a part of me that just sort of likes the idea of, seeing the Georgia defense in 2023 kind of by appearances resemble a little bit more of what the 2021 defense kind of looked like. I think there's some of that that's true too. Let's see what else. A Dallas dog coming in for the Dog Nation cruise says Texas is going to be in the house. Dallas, that's awesome to hear. I'm glad you're going to be there. That's great. I'm looking forward to seeing you too. Lee Burkett checking in from the Baptist South Hospital in Jacksonville. Lee, we're glad to have you with us, and we're praying for you. I'm glad you're here today. Thank you so much. Let's see what else. Bill says you got to have the skills, but what's between the ears is also just as important. Got to keep your mind right and not let the hype get to him. And yeah, for anybody who's, I think you're talking about quarterback, for anybody who would potentially be the quarterback, that's a part of it. I thought that Jake Fromm was really good in describing that a little earlier, which is you can't fake it. You can't be something you're not, but you better be, the most confident version of yourself too. Because, look, can you imagine what it's like to sort of step up and try to lead these huge men and say, hey, I'm going to take you where you want to go. And it takes a lot of confidence to be able to do that. And if you try to fake it, they're going to see right through it. But if you're not confident enough, they're going to be turned off by that. It's one of the reasons why quarterback's such a special position because, to be comfortable in your own skin and just sort of do all that naturally, not necessarily always an easy thing. Big Dog says if we get Deuce and Ellis, we're going to have 3 Robinsons. Yeah, I got to tell you, that's one of the things that's always kind of tricky for me is Georgia's had, 3 Warrens? You may have 3 Robinsons coming up. There have been a lot of common names among the Georgia players, which for someone like me only sets me up to be, confused and potentially wrong. Hemingway says complimentary football all the way. That is how the Dogs went back-to-back, and I believe you're right about that. Let's see what else. All right, let's see what else. Zebulon Owen wants to hear me say family. So there you go, Zebulon. Family. Be interesting to see what kind of offseason it is for Brian Kelly's family down in Baton Rouge. Seems like they're feeling pretty good about themselves right now. Marique and Sherry ask about how the quarterback is going to go this spring. So my guess is that Carson Beck gets the first snap with the first team on the first day of spring practice. And then after that, I think that Georgia's going to do everything it can to kind of demonstrate the openness of this competition. And I guess the one thing I would be curious of is, I don't think there's any way that Georgia names a starter to conclude spring practice. I don't think there's any way that's true. But does anything get said that would lead you to believe that there's some separation that's formed? Or is it one of those things where they just kind of pay lip service to the idea that it's all equal, it's all the same, all across the board, nothing's, different? I think that would be something I'd be curious about. Some teams in some instances have said, hey, the spring at least creates some separation here. That these 2 guys have pulled away from the other, or this guy is not the starter, but he's kind of pulled away from the other 2 a little bit. I would imagine that's not what's going to be said, but it's at least possible that it could be said. And so that's what I'd be a little bit curious about is there anything acknowledged post-spring that is different from where things were to begin spring? That's what I'd be curious about. And I guess there's a chance, they just treat Beck like the starter, but I really don't think that's going to happen. That's not anything to do with Carson one way or another. Carson could be Johnny Unitas, and I don't think they would just sort of treat him like the starter during spring. I think they're going to try to make this an open competition, but I guess you would at least be watching out for the possibility that they're kind of treating this a little bit more as if it's, Carson's, sort of right of first refusal to win, maybe. But I don't believe it's going to go that way. Paul Moon says, I'm just curious what we have in Brock Vandegrift. I was so hyped for him coming out, but it's just been silent on him. Yeah, I would say that I kind of agree with that. It feels like, Paul, it's been a little bit quiet. Now, I will tell you this. I, at one point in time, I used to also feel the same way about Carson Beck. And, maybe that somewhat's changed. I think some of this kind of comes down to what I've said before. This is one of those things I'd actually really like to ask somebody, but it's like if you ever get a chance to ask a press conference question, you don't kind of waste your question on something like this. But, what does the number 3 quarterback do? And maybe we'll ask Jake Fromm this next week. But it's like we know what the backup does. We know what the 4th string quarterback does. But, the 3rd string quarterback just seems to have less of a role. And so I think that's part of the reason why it sort of feels like it's at one point maybe quiet on Carson because he was in that role. And now, maybe it feels like it's kind of quiet on Brock Vandagriff because now it's Vandagriff who's in that role. But whoever is in that number 3 role, you're not hearing, oh, my gosh, the work he's doing as scout team quarterback. Or, you don't really have that person you would think, kind of taking those snaps in a game readiness type situation. So, I will admit I think it's been a little bit quiet on Brock too, but I will also say that coming out of high school, I was really enamored with his talent. Buddy Lee C says, as a Georgia fan, I wanted the championship game to be at least as good, to at least be a good game. He says, we could have scrimmaged our own guys and got a better game. Do you feel like this was a classic? No, it was certainly odd to see Georgia go out there and just dominate a national championship game. Now, kind of amazing they were able to do that, but kind of brings to mind of, when you see G-Day is not as intense as some of the stuff that they're doing behind closed doors. You'd give anything. And I'm not even sure sometimes some of those summer scrimmages that the boosters go to and things like that. I bet sometimes I sort of get the impression that some of the stuff that goes on during the week's the real stuff. That's the stuff that is really the most intense. And I know Kirby's kind of compared it in fast, the 92 Dream Team, some of the famous practices they had. The idea that, you just have these super intense practices that were way more intense than any of the games. If I ever could be a fly on the wall, or if you ever could have some sort of pay-per-view that showed all that off and demonstrated that'd be great to see. But, yeah, I do think that the Georgia practice would have been more intense than that national championship game was. I think you're right about that. John says the 23 team may be the best team UGA's ever put on the field. You could be right about that, John. You really could. Let's get ready to wrap up here in a moment. Paul Moon, the subject of Marcus Rosemy-Jack saying coming back. I think quietly he had a pretty good season for Georgia. I really do. I think quietly he was a very dependable target for Stetson Bennett, and I do believe his return matters. I do. I think his return matters. Thomas Orzak asking about the Georgia wide receivers. Yeah, watching that competition unfold to see, how a healthy Arian Smith fits into all of that. We'll put the rah-rah thing aside for the moment because that's unknowable here. But obviously in the Dominic Lovett, you'd expect him to be a part of that. Dominic Lovett was the leading wide receiver in the SEC this season. That's a big deal to have that guy on your team for this upcoming year. So I would say that the opportunities to create a very interesting pecking order at wide receiver is probably about as good as Georgia's had. Chase White says, how about the cornerback on the other side of Kamari Lassiter? Yeah, I guess Dalen Everett going to get maybe first crack at that, I would say. Maybe so. Spencer Clark says a Carson Beck, Arian Smith connection just sounds like success. Spencer, I would agree with you on that. You could be right about that. Big Dog on the subject of Ohio State asking about who's going to replace C.J. Stroud. Yeah, they got quarterbacks waiting in the wings. I guess I don't quite yet know who their starter is going to be. But, this is one of those things where I would assume that Ohio State's going to have a good quarterback no matter what. So I would assume they're going to have a good quarterback no matter what here. Let's see, what else? He also said a UGA LSU rematch in the SEC championship would be a much closer game. Yeah, we kind of said this going into the SEC championship that, hey, maybe LSU was the best team remaining that Georgia would play. Obviously, Ohio State, I think, proved that not to be true. But was LSU better than TCU? They might have been. They very well might have been. Let's see what else. Richard D said that a Michigan fan at work tell me she was pulling for TCU so someone different could win it. I had to inform her. Georgia just won their first national championship in 40 years. Yeah, we kind of said that it seems like that Georgia kind of went from being the, it seems like people got tired of Georgia very, very fast because, as you say, Georgia actually hadn't won a national championship in more than 40 years, but people kind of move off that pretty quick. Gary Holt checking out. Gary, we appreciate you being here. We're getting ready to leave ourselves. Keith Volt says LSU was definitely better than TCU. I guess I probably agree with that. Mike Nash says, hey, don't forget, Pickens said that NFL practices were easy compared to UGA. That's very true. Alan Verbanchik also mentioning the field goal kicker situation. Watching the replacement for Podlesny going to be a big challenge there, too. You're right about that. He also says it's going to be a great season no matter who's at quarterback. I totally agree. Doug Rayburn says Bloody Tuesday became a buzzword, and at Georgia, I believe that was literal, too. They get after it, which is part of the reason they've had the success they've had. Joseph Kennedy says Gunnar Stockton's country strong, and I think that's true, and that probably serves him well. Let's see what else. Jay Harwell also pointing out after the stress of the Ohio State game is perfectly fine with the 65-7 national championship game. Yeah, I think most Georgia fans felt the same way about that. All right, we're going to get ready to wrap up here today. Appreciate all of you being here. And obviously, we told you before, our buddy Hayes Calloway won his golden shoe today for some of that nice stuff that he had on his wall. And if you want to have some of that same kind of stuff yourself there, you can go to ajc.com/dogsnews. It's ajc.com/dogsnews, and you can get the full array of the field editions and the book that I'm happy to be included in, and all kinds of great ways to sort of celebrate and show off your Georgia fandom. ajc.com/dogsnews. Great place to go there on that. Also, our friends at R.S. Andrews, online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They will show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. If you're cold, by the way, heating system, you get that thing tuned back up to factory fresh specs because maybe you weren't as toasty warm last night as you needed to be. Well, R.S. Andrews can make sure that you stay nice and comfortable for the rest of the winter. And it won't cost you $99. So find them online at rsandrews.com for more on that. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then.